Live from KAIT 8 TV, good neighbors you can turn to for news, weather, and sports. Tony Brooks, Diana Davis, Terry Wood, and Dick Clay. This is KAIT 8 News.
Good evening, I'm Diana Davis.
And I'm Tony Brooks. In a statement given to the police and obtained by a Memphis newspaper, 17-year-old Jesse Miskelly allegedly confesses to watching two others as well as children.
On May 6, 1993, in West Memphis, Arkansas, 3 8-year-old boys were found dead just a few feet in front of where I'm standing right now. For some, their murderers have been brought to justice. For others, the question as to who killed Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch remains. Whodunit?
Jack the Ripper, the brutal serial killer who terrorized London in the late 1800s.
36 passengers got off the jetliner in Seattle last night. Left aboard 4 crew members and the hijacker, dressed in a business suit.
Bodies of 9 hikers were found almost 60 years ago. The cause of their deaths is still unknown.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting.
Triple homicide, case file 9305-0666.
I have headache.
Someone using sophisticated equipment managed to briefly and illegally override broadcast signals on WTN.
1948, a man was found dead on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, slumped against a seawall and dressed in a suit.
Thought of a dead person did not enter my mind. I thought it was a mannequin because it was so white. And so,
we call it the money pit.
Amelia Earhart checked over every detail of her $80,000 fine laboratory. Then the Western world came to understand
The investigators say they are searching for, quote, a madman.
I was very surprised. It did kind of have me on my toes a little bit.
Oh, yeah?
I definitely, when you said you were going to, because you told me you were going to go see the crime scene, I was like, there's no way he's actually going to see it. And then
100% just standing at the crime scene like, hey,
let's go.
This is where it happened. Insane, right?
Totally. So that very real reaction was of them reacting to that video that they had already seen in advance. Because guess what? This is the second recording of this entire episode of Whodunit.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise! That's the only reason I'm here.
AJ, I just wanted to... You doing something different today? You look a little... You just... I don't know if I just kind of noticed something out of this region.
I am growing my hair out.
Yeah, no, that's...
I'm sorry, I'm like...
That's super cool.
Dude, it's like super long. It's like super long, I need to cut it.
Let's go.
Shut up. You know, my hair is always super short, so this is growing it out. I'm trying to grow it out.
Yes.
I don't know, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it.
So I was more... The fact that I can see hair is more of the problem. Do you... Hat!
I had a feeling if it was like me wearing a hat. I wasn't sure because this was a serious thing. Okay, I can wear it. I can get my hat on.
Are we supposed to solve a crime? Okay. Well, I'm immediately
is this not
little bit regretting my decision.
No, immediately I think it's
hat.
way better.
Do you think maybe you had anything different? Oh.
Is this better?
Oh,
is
this
boy.
Better?
Immediately worse somehow.
Yeah, you managed...
Why can't I am the guy who wears fun hats. Kanan wears fun ties. I can wear fun hats.
Well, let's get into some fun murders.
I'll change my head.
Let's get right into the case of the West Memphis 3. May 5th, 1993, 6 p.m. Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch are seen by neighbors riding their bicycles on North 14th Street, heading in the direction of Goodwin. According to neighbors, stepfather to Stevie Branch, Terry Hobbs, calls after them, telling them to come back. 6:30 p.m. Stepfather to Christopher Byers, John Mark Byers, returns home from taking stepson Ryan to court to find Christopher absent from the home with a punishment chore in the carport unfinished. Byers, alongside wife Melissa, drives around the neighborhood searching for the boys. At 8 p.m., he calls the West Memphis police to report his stepson missing. By 8:30, according to Byers, he was searching the wooded area known as Robin Hood Hills where his son often played. At 8:42 p.m., the same officer who responded to Byers' missing person report to take a statement responds to another call, approaching the nearby Bojangles drive-thru window. Through the window, the manager describes a bleeding black man who had entered the restaurant about a half hour prior and entered the women's restroom. He had left shortly thereafter, but not without leaving blood smeared across the walls of the bathroom. According to the manager, the man had blood on his face and seemed mentally disoriented. Someone else was egging a house, though, so she had to head out.
This is a sad part of the video where jokes should not be made.
She left. Honestly, that wasn't a joke. That wasn't a joke. She left to take a report about someone egging a house without following up on this bloody man entering the Bojangles.
Literally, this man's just covered in blood, and she leaves so she can file a report on someone egging a house.
At around 9 p.m., Dana Moore and Pamela Hobbs called to report their respective sons missing. Or actually, what happens in Hobbs' case is that her husband comes into the restaurant where she works, goes to a payphone, calls in the boys missing, or calls in the son missing, and then comes out and tells her what was going on afterward, which I think is just an interesting way that those events transpired. He just goes straight to the payphone, doesn't tell her what's happening, calls in the report, and then goes and explains. Anyway.
Oh my gosh.
May 6th, 6 a.m., Chief Inspector of the WMPD, Gary Gitchell, announces that the 3 boys are missing. This is when formal searches really begin taking place. Not unusual for missing persons cases, particularly in May, when temperatures won't get dangerously low. Groups as big as 50 at one point conducted a shoulder-to-shoulder march across the woods, but this turned up nothing. By around 1:30 p.m., searchers had left the woods to fan out and look elsewhere. All searchers, that is, but one Steve Jones, Crittenden County juvenile officer. Stamping through a plot of woods near the poignantly named Blue Beacon truck wash, Jones peers into a tributary of a larger nearby stream and spots a lone detail that sends a chill down his spine. A single, laceless black tennis shoe floating ominously on the surface of the water. Sergeant Mike Allen, responding to Jones's radioed report of the discovery, wastes no time. Sporting dress shoes and a tie, Allen wades into the cloudy water. It isn't long before the squelching sound of his foot rising in the water is accompanied by a grotesque form dislodging itself from the depths. Now, I'm about to give a description of the bodies. A fair warning, this material is exceptionally disturbing. I'm going to leave a timestamp that you can skip to, which will allow you to bypass the description if you would prefer. Zach and AJ, however, don't get that same option, so buckle up. It's real rough. Okay. 1:45 p.m. The body of 8-year-old Michael Moore floats to the surface. The boy is naked with severe head wounds. But the most striking element of the scene is one that had been, unbeknownst to the investigating officers, foreshadowed by the lone, laceless tennis shoe. The boy was bound, back arched, left hand to left foot, right hand to right, with his own shoelaces. The next discoveries were Michael's Cub Scout cap and shirt, alongside what would undoubtedly sink investigator spirits still further, 2 more pairs of laceless tennis shoes. Other notable discoveries included 3 pairs of pants, 2 of which were intriguingly inside out, despite still being zipped and buttoned. The second body Allen discovers belongs to Stevie Branch, found further still downstream. Branch appears similarly to have been beaten and bound, but in addition to these similarities, there's one striking difference. It appears that the left side of Branch's face may have been bitten. Christopher Byers is found last. He is similarly face down in the mud when discovered, and similarly bound and naked. When pulled to the surface, however, the investigators are further horrified to discover that he appears to have been castrated. Okay, that's the end of the description. So let's get back into the remainder of the details, which are no less sad, but are less graphic. The bicycles are found nearby, also underwater. Now, at around 3:20, almost 2 hours after the first body is found for those keeping score, someone has a novel idea. Let's call the coroner. The boys are not officially pronounced dead until 4 p.m. Next, the case is logged. The investigation begins, and very quickly whispers of satanic activity begin to circulate throughout the blood-marred city of West Memphis, postmarked by the case number 93050666. According to lead detective Gary Gitchell, the numerical assignment is the coincidental result of 0666 being the next number available. The report that would be found years later, from 2 days after the bodies are found, however, seemed to paint a picture of officers with a particular motive in mind. The case, says the report, is actually supposed to be numbered 93050555. By May 26th, 20 days after the bodies were found, Gitchell is growing desperate. His department has uncovered absolutely no valuable leads and are apparently no closer to catching the perpetrator or perpetrators than the day the bodies were discovered. What's more, he still has yet to receive the autopsy report from the medical examiner. 20 days! 20 days!
Freaking days.
It
doesn't... Nah.
That's too long. Like that, it shouldn't.
Almost a
take
whole month.
Nearly that long.
Yeah, that's a long time. It's a long time. Particularly when you think about the amount of details that go away within the first 48 hours of a case, you'd want to start generating leads as soon as possible, but he's heard nothing. One of the biggest missing holes in the path to the killer still remains motive. What led someone or someones to murder 3 innocent boys in cold blood? Enter Jerry Driver. Driver is a juvenile probation officer, and when he hears about the murders, one name immediately comes to mind: Damien Eccles. Driver has been responsible for the 18-year-old Eccles for the past year, since Eccles reportedly threatened the life of a recent ex-girlfriend and a male friend of hers. Not to underplay the event's significance, but the pair did end up back together following this event.
That's a red flag if I've ever seen one. And I've seen many red flags in my day.
Damien, according to Driver, has an interest in the occult, and in Driver's words, he looked like one of those slasher movie type guys. Boots, coat, long, stringy black hair, though he cut it short sometimes. Thank you, Jerry Driver. Very cool. Driver had taken Eccles to a mental institution after hearing a rumor that Eccles and his girlfriend intended to conceive a child to sacrifice it to the devil.
Bummer.
So, I don't know what's funnier in this situation. The fact that there is a rumor going around that Damien and his girlfriend are going to sacrifice their child to the devil, or that Jerry Driver just heard this and said, yeah, I'm going to buy into that 100%.
Well, we don't know the dude. Maybe it's believable. Who knows?
Let's give Jerry Driver the benefit of the doubt for the time being, and let's assume that he had some reason to believe this to be true. Okay. So intrigued by Eccles was Driver, when Eccles had moved for a time to Oregon, Driver called the local authorities to warn them of Eccles' presence.
Driver, I barely know her.
He claims Damien has been contacting his ex-girlfriend against the terms of his parole. Should be noted, no such terms have ever been recorded as existing. When I consider police missteps in this case, I cannot include missteps in the case of Jerry Driver because he is not a police officer. To clarify, he is a juvenile detention officer who just happens to consistently think that he's a police officer and overstep his jurisdiction. But
he's kind of like those guys with the radios in their car that will like drive around. They'll listen to like because they heard it on the radio, so they want to. Oh, it's my right as a citizen to respond. Just get out of their way. Shut up. Get out of their way.
That is a fair summary of Jerry Driver, but anyway, let's continue. Now, with 3 murders at the forefront of Driver's attention, Driver begins to focus on suspects. I will again reiterate, not a police officer. He's just kind of doing this.
That's kind of sums it up. He's not a cop. He's just doing this.
He's just there. There's Damien. Damien's new girlfriend, Domini.
Which is a really cool name.
That is a pretty cool name. Damien and Domini, like, that's pretty metal. I'm not gonna lie. Then there's 16-year-old Jason Baldwin. Baldwin shares Eccles' interests in skateboarding and heavy metal music. It isn't long before Damien and Jason are interviewed by police. Damien says whoever committed the crimes is sick. Jason says watching someone die would make him feel disgusted.
I feel like those are fair responses, but also just fair enough that someone pretending to not be a murderer.
It's all coming together now. That's exactly what they want us to think. Damien is later brought in for questioning at the station and is asked various questions about the motives for the murder. Damien answers in ways that seem to align with the now popular occult theory. Damien claims that the night of the murders he was with Jason Baldwin and Dominique Tier as they had gone to Jason's uncle's house. His mother picked him and Domini up and took Domini home. Eccles then stated that he and his family went to a friend's house where they stayed until about 5, then returned home. That evening he called a friend in Tennessee and talked to her until about 11:30. He was home for the rest of the night according to his account. At this point, the investigators administer a polygraph.
Which are well known for being perfectly right.
Oh yeah,
I was going to say the most utilized, always 100% accurate tool.
Always so
true. Justice system.
That is correct, and as such, let's get into the polygraph results. According to the administrator, Detective Durham, Damien indicated deception regarding questions that surrounded murdery stuff, like, where were you on the night the boys were killed? Do you know anything about the murders? Did you have anything to do with the murders, etc.? Those questions indicated deception. There's also a point during the interview where the investigators were like, you did it, we know you did it, the classic, we already have all the evidence against you, we just need you to clear everything up for us, and then this will all be way easier. A pretty common tactic to get people to confess. Damien says, okay, look, I'll tell you everything as soon as you let me talk to my mother. They bring his mom in, and he talks to his mom briefly, and then they spend a good while, I think it's like half an hour to an hour, setting up recording equipment to record the confession, and then they go, what do you know about the murders? And Damien looks at them and goes, nothing.
Honestly, that is
he's my
power move.
He's my favorite person in this entire case.
Also,
don't
first
have me.
off,
Favorite
power move,
person.
iconic. I'd love to see it. Second off, I relate to taking 30 minutes to an hour to set up all the recording.
Yeah, for real. There's another boy that needs to be introduced alongside Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin, but in order to do so, we need to talk about another character, Vicky Hutchinson. Hutchison becomes involved in the West Memphis 3 case in a truly bizarre way, as if the previous people have not. She is working at a local truck stop when her employers suspect her of overcharging a customer's car by about $200 for her own personal use. When brought in for questioning regarding the charge, Hutchison brings her 8-year-old son, Aaron, to the station with her. Very quickly, the subject is steered from that of the credit card to that of Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Christopher Byers, who, at that time, are known to be missing but have not yet been found. Aaron is a friend of Michael Moore's, and in conversation with West Memphis PD, he tells police about a black man in a maroon car who picked up Michael Moore after school the afternoon he disappeared.
So my question is this dude the same dude covered in blood that the lady turned away from to call about an egging?
Right. It's a great question until you realize this has some problems. For one, no man or car is ever located, but more importantly, Michael Moore was not picked up from school by a random man. He came home the way he always does, by walking, because his house was in the adjoining lot next to the school.
Right next to it, like right,
so like,
right next to it. Yes,
school, like legit school where he was.
Schoolhouse,
like
yeah.
A 30-second, 45-second walk.
Correct. I drove over to where his house is. I looked at it, and they were not lying when they said it was close to the school. Like, that understatement of the century. So Aaron's claims are initially dismissed until the police, failing to generate other leads, begin to reevaluate his claims. So we can put a pin in that. We'll come back to it later. Aaron Hutchison will go on to become a key witness, but we'll come back to that. May 13th. Detective Bray interviews Vicky Hutchison again. This time, though, there's no pretense about the subject of conversation. This was about the murders. Once again, Hutchison brings Aaron to the station with her. Bray at this point also subscribes to the cult theory, and thus asks Hutchison if she knows anything about, quote, an occult or devil worshippers. Hutchison denies knowing of any such activity. This does not stop her from calling Bray days later to say that neighborhood kids do know about a local cult. This is the point at which Hutchison tells Bray that she's going to do some digging. Now we can bring in Jesse Miskelly Jr. Miss Kelly is 17 years old, and his name is on the list of potential devil worshippers that Jerry Driver had given to Don Bray. Jesse is about 5'1", and had known Jason Baldwin since elementary school. Says Jason, he was alright, he just didn't learn quick, and he didn't have much common sense either. He could be funny, but maybe we were all laughing more at him than with him. Back to Vicky Hutchison. Hutchison knows that the police are very interested in Damien Eccles. In her mind, Jesse Miskelly is the perfect avenue to meet Eccles. So, in a statement Hutchison gave the West Memphis police, Miskelly had told her that he'd seen some boys that could have been Michael, Christopher, and Stevie walking near the Blue Beacon truck wash. It's worth noting that there's absolutely no way that could have been true, because at the time that she described as having happened, Michael and Christopher and Stevie all would have been at school. But nonetheless, Jesse, during school, was known to be a fighter. He had significant behavioral issues, which in part likely stemmed from the developmental problems which he also exhibited. When an examiner administered an IQ test at age 7, Jesse had scored a 67. At age 10, he scored a 75. These estimates land him somewhere between the low end of normal brain function and some level of mental handicap. During his time at school, Jesse once stabbed a girl in the head with a pencil, and once punched out windows with his bare hands, bloodying them. So, two instances of Jesse exerting physical force. Now, when Hutchison asks Miss Kelly if he knows Damien Eccles, says he does, but doesn't know him well. Regarding whether Eccles practiced witchcraft, Miss Kelly recalls, I told her, I don't really know, I just knowed he was a weird person. When Hutchison asks about Jason Baldwin, Jesse is more enthusiastic. I've known Jason since the 6th grade. He's a nice person. Me and him, we've always gotten along. now for Hutchison's plan to get information out of Damien. She, a 32-year-old, explains to Don Bray and Jerry Driver that she's going to pretend that she wants to go out with Damien. And they think it's a great idea.
How old's Damien again? Remind me?
18! Driver even tells Hutchison to get library books about the occult and place them around her house to make Damien feel more at home. When Jesse and
I forgot about that.
Excuse me?
I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I believe I compared it to like some sort of like potpourri, or they're just like, oh yes, they're just we have this light, or just this is some light reading. You go see some satanic cults and pagan weekly, and
you know how it is.
These police are just like, okay, we just want to lure in this literal teenager. So what we're gonna do? Okay, listen up. What we're gonna do here is we're going to take this lady who's 14 years older than the boy, right? Now, we think he might be into the occult, maybe, even though there's nothing backing that up. So, we're going to have her rent a bunch of books from the borrow a bunch of books from the library specifically about the occult to make him feel more at home. So maybe he'll date this lady 14 years older than him so we can get information out of him.
You are following along perfectly. From everything that I can tell, Damien did not bite. So let's continue here. When Jessie introduces the pair per her request, Damien spends a total of 15 minutes inside the home. Then his mother picks him up. All sources seem to indicate that this is the only significant contact that the pair ever has. All sources, that is, except Hutchison. According to Hutchison, this is the beginning of an 8-day relationship, during which she is extracting information from Damien left and right. At one point, Hutchison claims Damien picks her up in a red Ford Escort, with Jessie in the car as well. Their destination? An espot, a meeting of witches, having some kind of ritualistic orgy in a lone field, all using nicknames such as Lucifer, Spider, and Snake, with faces and arms painted black.
The names get me every time. The names get me every time. It sounds like a bunch of 8-year-olds who got walkie-talkies from Walmart. They were like, "Hello, Snake. This is Lucifer. Come in, Snake."
Right? I know.
Read you loud and clear, Lucifer. I'm over here at this end of the orgy. I'm over here. Oh my gosh. I don't understand.
It sounds so much like Vicky Hutchison sat there and was like, "Ooh, what are some good Satan names?"
Yo,
Lucifer.
This is so cool. This is gonna be so
Spider. Cool. Snake.
Yes. Vindication. You can keep that in, just out of context. Just throw that in there somewhere.
Now, a quick disclaimer. It is a new moon that night, and with no moonlight illuminating the scene, it is difficult to imagine how Hutchison would have seen the level of detail that she describes. What is more, Eccles cannot and does not drive, and furthermore, the red Ford Escort does not exist.
We love consistency.
Oh yeah.
We love lying in police reports.
Right? Like what? Anyway.
Which is a crime.
So, May 27th, 21 to 22 days after the murders, Gary Kitchell is beginning to find the testimony of a waitress more compelling, aided by the sheer number of voices echoing the sentiment that Damien Eccles is responsible for the crimes. What's more, Aaron Hutchison has more to say about the crime. Now, Aaron says that he and the 3 victims had regularly played in the woods. They even had a clubhouse there. They also sometimes spied on 5 men who gathered to chant about the devil and have sex. The next day,
as a normal.
Me and the boys.
That's what I call it. me and the.
The next day, Vicky Hutchison shows police a skull-shaped earring and claims it belongs to Damien. Hutchison then says...
Why Pause. Again, why was that so funny to you?
I just, every single thing added to it, it's just like,
right,
now,
it's just...
The next bit of evidence, this earring, you see how it's shaped like a skull? That means it was Damien's. And you know, the name Damien, you know what it sounds like? Demon.
Damon.
Guilty.
I would love to say that is not used as evidence in the court case.
No, she does.
But Damien sounding like demon sure is.
No.
On June 2nd, Durham breaks out the polygraph machine again, this time for Hutchison. According to Durham, she is telling the truth. That night, Hutchison asks Miss Kelly to stay the night because her boyfriend is at work and she is afraid of a prowler that she says has been reported in the neighborhood. Miss Kelly sleeps on the couch in her trailer with a gun nearby. June 3rd, 9 a.m. Miss Kelly is awakened by his father, accompanied by Detective Sergeant Mike Allen. Allen wants to take Miss Kelly in for questioning. Get it? It was a setup.
Oh my god.
Miss Kelly accepts. Don't know why they felt like they had to set up this weird sting operation instead of just asking him to come in. But whatever.
Yeah, that lasted like that. It was so the usage of their resources as law enforcement is just does not make sense to me.
Yeah, I feel like they're abusing their resources and just being super like inefficient. Like what?
Yeah. So Alan takes him to the station, then explains after filling out the paperwork that he needs Miss Kelly's dad's consent to question him. So they go to the station together, and then he's like, oh, need your dad. And so they leave, and they have to go find his dad again, who's at the McDonald's. And on the way, Alan allegedly tells Jesse that there is a $35,000 reward for information on the case, and any information about the murders means that he can get his dad a new truck. Reminder that this is the borderline mentally handicapped kid that he is saying this to. Just throwing that out there. After Miss Kelly's dad signs the necessary form, he's polygraphed. It's worth noting that Miranda rights are recited only to the underage mentally handicapped Miss Kelly and not to his father. During the polygraph, Miss Kelly is told that the machine can read his mind, and that whatever his mind says is true, even if it isn't what he is telling Durham, who again is administering the polygraph. I didn't know what was going on, because how could my brain be telling him I was sitting there lying? It got me confused. Then he stood up and he was talking. He kind of spit on me. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, because he was yelling when he did it. I drew back. I was going to hit him. Then Mike Allen came in and grabbed me. Jesse, Miss Kelly. Next, Gary Gitchell takes Miss Kelly into another room and begins asking the same questions about the murders repeatedly. Gitchell asks for a description of the boys. Miss Kelly tells him what he had heard from the papers. Miss Kelly says he wants to go home. Gitchell tells him in a minute, but continues to interrogate Miss Kelly. How does Jesse know so much about the murder if he wasn't the perpetrator? They know Jesse did it, Gitchell says. People already told him he was responsible. After I told him what the boys were wearing, Gary Gitchell asks me, was any of them tied up? That's when I went along with him. I repeated what he told me. I said, yes, they was tied up. He asked, what was they tied up with? I told him, a rope. He got mad. He told me, God damn it, Jesse, don't mess with me. He said, no, they was tied up with shoestrings. I had to go all through the story again until I got it right. They hollered at me until I got it right. So whatever he was telling me, I started telling him back. But I figured something was wrong, because if I had killed him, I'd have known how I'd done it. None of this is tape recorded.
As we all know, this is definitely not manipulation.
Not leading to witness. Oh, no.
This innocent kid tell us, what he thinks probably happened, and then if he gets this story wrong from what we saw, make him say it again so it sounds like he's admitting it.
So investigators do not record any of these exchanges. We just know they took place because of Miss Kelly's testimony accompanied by some handwritten notes that one of the detectives took.
Gotcha.
Conveniently, this stuff was not included in their typed report of the events, just in the handwritten notes. According to Miss Kelly, Gitchell next draws a circle. Around the circle are numerous X's, and inside are 3 dots. The inside dots, says Gitchell, are Miss Kelly, Eccles, and Baldwin. The outside X's are police surrounding the trio. Gitchell says that Miss Kelly can either be in or out, and Miss Kelly says that he wants to be out. This is corroborated by Bridges' handwritten notes. They also play a recording, the disembodied voice of a child that gives a haunting pronouncement. Nobody knows what happened but me. This is in the detective's own words, solely to freak Jesse out. Jesse does not know that this was the voice of Aaron Hutchison, taken from a previous interview. Is Zach frozen?
Nope. Oh, yes, he is.
I thought he was just like chilling with his eyes closed for a while.
I thought he was too. I was like, oh, is Zach falling asleep?
Jesse claims that Damien and Jason had called him 3 times about the murders. Once the day before, again on the morning of the murders, and a 3rd time soon after the murders, after dark, when he'd heard Damien in the background saying, "We did it." The investigators next show Miss Kelly a photo of one of the victims, a coroner's photo of the boy's dead body. Miss Kelly identifies the photo of as being of, quote, the Moore boy. Miss Kelly at this point is visibly shaken. At some point, he tells Gitchell that he was present for the murders. This is when Gitchell decides to begin recording. Miss Kelly describes receiving a phone call from Jason Baldwin, seeing the 3 victims the morning of May 5th, and following them with Baldwin and Damien Eccles. He says Damien hit one of the boys, says it was the Moore boy, though he points to Christopher Byers in the photo. To clarify, Moore Byers. When Ridge prompts that he saw Damien strike Byers in the head, Miss Kelly agrees. Note that he previously had not said where Eccles had hit Byers. Miss Kelly then says Michael Moore attempted to run away, so Miss Kelly grabbed him. Then, when Baldwin and Eccles had caught up, Miss Kelly left. The big problems with this confession thus far are A, Miss Kelly is describing this taking place that morning, when all 3 victims were in school and accounted for. B, Miss Kelly has now described himself leaving without actually witnessing the murders that he just claimed to have witnessed. Ridge, of course, needs Miss Kelly back at the scene. Okay, and when you came back a little later, now all 3 boys are tied? Miss Kelly says yes, despite having made no mention of returning to the scene. Miss Kelly then says again that he took off and ran home. He even says that Baldwin and Eccles called and asked him why he didn't stay. Ridge now suggests that one of the other 2 had a knife. Miss Kelly agrees and says it was Baldwin. Miss Kelly then describes Baldwin cutting one of the boys. The officers supply that it was Byers, and then supply the location of the body where Byers was cut, which Miss Kelly accepts. When they ask what time this occurred, Miss Kelly says 12, noon, the officers clarify. Ridge asks if this was after school was out. He needs the time to be different. Miss Kelly persists. I didn't go to school. The boys skipped school as well, according to Miss Kelly. The detectives, knowing this was not true, ask again, and again Miss Kelly insists these events occurred early in the morning. The rest of Miss Kelly's confession continues to contradict the facts of the case. The full transcript is available if either of you care to read it.
Yep.
Anyway, we've covered the most important events of the case, so now it's time for Central Suspect Speed Run. But real quick, before we get into that, AJ, I'm going to need you to pull out the other hat again.
Oh, okay.
No, the other hat.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Not okay. Think different holiday. The leprechaun hat. Put on the leprechaun hat.
Oh, okay. Does that make you happy? Now I can wear my hat?
Okay, and now I can continue. Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, Jesse Misskelley, and Dominique Tier's homes are searched. Baldwin and Misskelley are arrested alongside Damien. In perhaps the funniest detail in this otherwise morbid case, Jason, Damien, and Domini are together when they are arrested at Damien's house watching, wait for it, Leprechaun. Yeah. The Warwick Davis B horror movie.
Forgot about that, actually.
Watching the Warwick Davis B horror movie Leprechaun.
Just think of Child's Play, but Chucky is Irish.
Yep.
Oh gosh.
Anyway, back to Central Suspect Speed Run. Inspector Gitchell, when asked by press how confident he was in the case on a scale of 1 to 10, said with a smirk, 11. Jesse's confession quickly leaks to the press. Headlines abound. Aaron Hutchison's stories become more elaborate. He now claims to have witnessed the murders. The trials begin. Jesse Misskelley is tried separately, but Eccles and Baldwin are tried together per prosecution's insistence. Prosecution witnesses include an expert on the occult who turned out to have obtained his PhD via mail-order degree, which was a very funny moment in the trial, most of which has been recorded. You can see the defense lawyer asking this guy questions, and he goes, so how many classes did you take between acquiring your college degree and acquiring your PhD? And then the guy goes, 0.
Top tier American education system.
Evidence against the three included a knife found in a pond behind Jason's trailer park. The knife, however, was only found because Jason's mother had mentioned having thrown it there when Jason had misbehaved a full year prior to the murders. So it's a little hard to argue that that was a murder weapon. Damien's ex-girlfriend testifies that the knife is similar to one that Damien previously owned. Again, according to Jesse's confession, Damien was not the one with a knife. It was Jason, so that also has some issues. Damien's affinity for tasting blood is a known thing. He's a known blood drinker. Whenever people had gotten cuts on them, he is reported to have sucked blood off their arms and that sort
Licked
of thing.
them?
Yep.
I feel like that's not hygienic.
Fibers that were deemed consistent with a shirt found in Eccles' home, and some consistent with a bathrobe belonging to Baldwin's mother on the victims. So, a couple problems with that. One, the fibers are common enough that if you walked into any Walmart, you'd be able to find fibers that matched these items. The other issue is, I don't know, you'd have to assume that Baldwin had gotten a fiber from his mom's bathrobe on him and then transferred it to the victims without transferring any fibers that linked to him.
Mm-hmm. Plausible, certainly.
Yes, it is absolutely a thing that could have happened. Blue candle wax found on Stevie Branch's shirt. Blue wax was also found in a book in Eccles' bedroom, and his girlfriend owned a blue candle. I feel like that is sort of self-explaining evidence. It's interesting. I've heard people mention this candle. They're like, not only did Eccles have blue candle wax in one of his books, but his girlfriend had a candle. Which makes me think, yeah, his girlfriend's candle is probably how he got the candle wax in one of his books. I don't understand why those are listed as separate pieces of evidence. But anyway, a necklace belonging to Damien Eccles containing blood consistent with Eccles and with either Stevie Branch or co-defendant Baldwin. One of the things about this piece of evidence is that many sources misrepresent this as saying both Branch and Baldwin's blood were found on the necklace, which is not true. Damien's blood was, well, blood consistent with Damien's, it was like a blood typing test that they did, was found, and blood that could have belonged to either his best friend of many years, Jason Baldwin, or victim Stevie Branch. I'm just going to go out on a limb and guess that probably belonged to lifelong friend Jason Baldwin, since we already know that Damien Echols has an affinity for blood and has made reference to blood pacts in the past. Anyway, like, even if they did commit the crimes, I find it unlikely that this necklace had Stevie Branch's blood on it. But whatever.
But whatever. Who cares about, like, actual definitive evidence when we're just pointing fingers at people willy-nilly?
So, conflicting accounts of timelines in Echols, Baldwin's, and Miss Kelly's alibis. Part of the issue with this was the way that alibis were recorded. But I have to say, if you go on alibi alone, there are approximately 20 central guilty parties. I think there must have been something like going on with the way stuff was recorded, because genuinely, no one's alibi holds up in this story. Anyway, there were 3 distinct knot varieties, according to some people. 2 to 3, kinda, is how people describe it. So the argument there being one person would probably tie one type of knot, and then they think that there would be, 3 different kinds of knots indicative of 3 people being involved. Testimony from Narlene Hollingsworth. Remember, Mr. LG, her son, is a suspect, and this ends up being a problem for the prosecution because she testifies that she saw Damien and Domini walking near the crime scene. However, the prosecution isn't arguing that Domini was involved, and so they kind of have to work around this and imply that what she actually saw was Damien and Jason, and because Jason had long hair, she mistook Jason for her niece. Seems like a lot of hoops to jump through.
It's super easy to mix up stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
A year after the murders took place, Jesse had mentioned throwing a bottle of some kind of whiskey that he'd been drinking, like underneath an overpass or something on the highway near the crime scene. And so one of the detectives went looking, and they managed to find a fragment of the type of whiskey that Jesse had described drinking on this road, which again, it's a year later. This is one of the busiest highways in the United States, and this is one of the most common whiskey, brands in the area. So hard for me to see this as a smoking gun. That means Jesse must have been there, but I mean, there you go. Oh wait. The accused wore black and listened to heavy metal music. There we go. And now I think I have covered everything. So, that's the evidence. And prosecutors with that managed to convince a jury, and all 3 were found guilty. Baldwin and Miss Kelly given life sentences, and Echols given the death penalty. The 3 would spend 18 years in prison. And then in 2011, after they finally managed to get a retrial, after the state found that hair found at the scene didn't match Echols, Baldwin, or Miss Kelly, the prosecution offered an Alford plea. So the way an Alford plea works is you maintain your innocence, but submit a guilty plea because you say that the state has enough evidence that they could probably convince a jury of your guilt, despite you being innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And
so basically, I didn't do it, but everyone will think I did, so.
Correct. So the prosecution says, not only do you not have to wait for the trial to go through if you accept our plea deal, you can walk out of prison today.
But
Damien, who is on death row and has many health issues like poor eyesight as a result of being in a solitary confinement cell for a very long time, tooth issues that he couldn't resolve because your dental care on death row involves pulling a tooth or leaving it, and Jesse, Miss Kelly, who was just happy to get out of prison, they both were like, yeah, we'll accept the deal. Jason is like, no, I would rather risk the chance of being in prison for the rest of my life so I can go to court again and prove my innocence rather than submit a guilty plea, even if I'm maintaining my innocence while doing so, and would get out today.
Yeah.
And so that's when the prosecutors are like, I thought we might hit this little snag, so here comes the fun twist. All three of you have to accept, or none of you get the deal. And
deal or no deal?
Yep. And that's when they lay it on the table and they show the briefcases and they're like, what's behind door number 2? And
imprisonment?
That's so dumb.
So Jason, put in this situation, accepts the deal for his friend Damien. And the three are released that day from prison. It's pretty clear to me that the prosecution knew that they didn't have a case, because I don't think that they would have offered a deal that allowed 3 child murderers to get out of prison.
Yeah.
If they thought they had any kind of case against them.
I also would not just let 3 child murderers walk free.
Now I want to transition real quick to wrap up and talk about some of the other suspects in the case. First off, Chris Morgan, Brian Holland. 4 days after the bodies of the 3 boys were found, Chris Morgan and Brian Holland moved to California. Later interviews are bizarre. If you care about polygraphs, which I do not, Morgan and Holland both indicate deception regarding the murders. Now, though, might be a good time to mention that Detective Durham, who's been administering all of these polygraph tests, doesn't even have his license to administer polygraph tests.
Yes. Two things come to mind when you first told me that. First off, Durham, I barely know him. 2, I don't care if I don't care about the poly test. I don't care about the polygraph test at all. It's stupid. It's pointless. It's inaccurate. It's flawed. But for some reason, the fact that it's operated by someone who really doesn't know how to work it makes it so much worse.
Oh,
right?
No,
yeah, it's
not
like...
only is it inaccurate, but even if it was accurate, he doesn't know how to do it. So
You're using a single-shot musket, but now you're also blindfolded. It's just compounding the lack of accuracy. Yeah. Well, when asked whether he's responsible for the murders, Morgan gives a hard maybe. Yeah, according to Morgan, he's been hospitalized for alcohol and drug abuse and could have blacked out and killed him. He's like, I have memory problems. I don't think I did it, but I don't know. Maybe.
It could be.
It doesn't sound like me.
Who's to say? Who's to say?
Yeah, that doesn't really sound like me, but I don't know.
You never know.
So he asks for a hypnotist. And they're like, why do you want a hypnotist? And he's like, do you have a hypnotist? And they're like, so what if we put you under and then you say you're guilty? And then he's like, well, then I'd go to prison. It's a weird interview.
Fair.
Just like, yep. This is part of my life, I guess. I knew this day would come where I'd kill someone and then I'd suffer the consequences for it due to my blackout drunkenness.
He also, when left alone in the interview room for a little while, gets, he's kind of pacing around, and then he puts a Kleenex over the camera, so for a good part of the recording of the interview, you can just see the back of a Kleenex. And then he T-poses on the chair, according to detectives. You can't see it because of the Kleenex. But apparently, for a while, he stands up in the chair and just...
He did it to a certain...
I don't believe this. I need proof.
Oh, also, one of them drove the ice cream truck through the boys' neighborhood and then sold ice cream to them. Red flag.
Red flag immediately. Anything involving an ice cream truck is something that I don't want to be a part of ever.
I heard an ice cream truck driving down my street today, and I was like, I hate it. Why is... something about it is so ominous to me. So anyway, transitioning to John Mark Byers. Byers is the stepfather of Christopher Byers, and he is one of the other people that some people look to as a person of interest. Byers made some conflicting statements about where he was. He gives some stories about his whereabouts, searching at different times with people, and then the other people essentially give similar stories to what he did, but they don't include him in the group of searchers, which could be worth noting. But again, no one has a solid alibi, so I don't know how much that means. There's a story about...
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, there's a story about Byers having whipped his stepson, who he adopted, just before he went missing, so that could potentially be a red flag. Those are the main things. There's a knife that belonged to him that had blood on it that was consistent with Christopher Byers, but then it turns out that the two of them have the same blood type, so it could have just been his blood. I think one of the things that is interesting is whenever the bodies are first found, he says, I was out until 4:30 a.m. I walked within feet of where the bodies were found and I didn't see them. Not really sure how he knew where the bodies were found, but...
That's true.
I mean, it depends on when he said that, I guess. Because if the...
He said it immediately after the bodies were found. The officers, walked out of the
The question
woods.
is, did he know where the bodies were found? Was he told where the bodies were found? Because, if not...
Right, and that's the question.
If so, then it's
that is the question.
I was right by there, I didn't see it.
So Terry Hobbs. Terry Hobbs is another stepfather, and he's, I think, a more interesting one to look at. Pam, his wife, and the mother of Stevie Branch, her family accused him of the murders from the very beginning, which I think is interesting. According to Terry Hobbs, his brother-in-law, Jackie Hicks Jr., had regularly threatened him for having killed Stevie. Their dispute came to a boil in November 1994 when Terry struck Pamela, and Pamela called her family for help. Terry loaded his .357 Magnum with hollow point bullets. When Jackie Hicks Jr. began fighting with Terry, Terry shot him in the gut. He survived for 10 more years until he died from a clot release during a follow-up surgery. The Hicks blamed Hobbs for his death, and I can't say that I particularly blame them. He made the mistake at one point of suing one of the Dixie Chicks for defamation because they had come out as saying that they thought Hobbs was responsible. And the part of the problem is one of the defenses for a defamation suit is truth. And so if you can convince the jury that, maybe it's entirely possible that he did do it, then you can win the case. And that's what the Dixie Chick did after a ton of witnesses came forward and said a lot of pretty incriminating things about Terry. Not in this case in particular, but, about him molesting his daughter, etc. So he and his former wife are now divorced. And Terry's name has been removed from his stepson's tombstone. In early 2007, Terry Hobbs's mtDNA was found similar to that of a hair collected from the bindings of Michael Moore, which led to heavier scrutiny by the private detectives hired by the Eccles appeal team and brought to light the accusations swirling around him. So, yeah, a hair that's consistent with about 1.5% of the population is consistent with him. That was found. He has a lot of issues with his alibi that have been discussed. If you want to hear more about Terry Hobbs, feel free to look into him. I'm now going to talk about some expert testimony. So, Werner Spitz is one of the most well-known forensic pathologists of all time. He's, kind of in the big leagues. He analyzed the wounds and determined that all of the external wounds were inflicted post-mortem, probably by animal predation, meaning they likely had nothing to do with the crime, which is interesting. Snapping turtles, not knife blades. Then, let's also talk about John Douglas, the John Douglas, the premier person when it comes to profiling, the guy that the Mindhunter TV show is based on. Atlanta child murders, Douglas. Green River killer, Douglas. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, Douglas. He's talked to Ed Kemper, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Ed Gein, Dennis Rader, Charles Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer. Basically, if they're terrible and you've heard of them, he's talked to them. Douglas put together a very interesting profile of the perpetrator, and I will say I have a ton of respect for what Douglas does, and I also think that he is a very reliable source of intelligence. It doesn't seem like he's someone who makes a lot of unfounded claims, so I think what he has to say is very interesting. Douglas staunchly believes the 3 convicted are innocent. His profile fits a single killer, not multiple. What's more, Douglas claims the homicides were not perpetrated by a stranger. Quote, the person responsible for this crime knew the victims, and knew the victims well. Says Douglas, I saw criminal sophistication at the crime scene. Using that kind of concerted effort, we're not looking at teenagers committing crimes here. Douglas sees a single murderer with a violent history who is familiar with the local geography, intent on degrading and punishing the victims. He believes the victims were not he believes the crimes were not sexually motivated, but that the murderer felt powerless, and when the boys disobeyed them, the killer murdered them in a sudden rage. Says Douglas, the killer was convinced the murders were justified and could lie with confidence. Douglas has interviewed Terry Hobbs twice and believes that he should have been put on the front burner in the investigation.
I remember, is that the same Terry Hobbs? Is that who we agreed upon last time, where you and I concluded that we think that was him?
He was the guy that we said was the strongest out of the presented suspects, yes. Mm-hmm. First of all, if you've never read it, you should check out John Douglas's book, the Cases That Haunt Us. It's really interesting. Douglas is very clearly a very smart guy. I mean, I think his resume kind of speaks for itself, but I put quite a bit of stock actually into what he says here, because a lot of times he's said kind of controversial things that people have strongly disagreed with until the profile that he creates helps catch the killer, and then they're all like, oh wow, he was right. I put quite a bit of stock into what Douglas says here, not specifically about Terry Hobbs, but just generally that we're looking for criminal sophistication, we're looking for history of violence, single perpetrator, intent on degrading and punishing the victims, knew them personally. I think that stuff is important to keep in mind. And I also think it's worth noting that Terry Hobbs grew up as a butcher. So he was trained from a young age to herd and kill animals. which is actually something that you look for in cases like this, for a perpetrator who has a history of killing animals, because it does actually tend to translate. You usually see animal killing prior to human killing. And then also the background of hurting those animals, it trains you in hurting people quite similarly. That level of control that you have to have over the creatures you're about to kill. So I think that's an interesting connection.
You know, I feel like not only is it the level of control, but also if you're like killing and torturing animals regularly, I feel like it also trains you to be able to ignore the "hey, don't kill me" stuff, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
That is exactly what it is. It's basically them practicing and like working their way up to basically bigger fish.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting. It sounds to me, the language that Douglas used, whether intentionally or not, it's almost paternal to me, right? It's like intent on punishing after the boys disobeyed them.
I would agree. I think that was another thing that we touched on last time. So you agreed upon that.
The last thing that I wanted to talk about was what's happening now with the case, because this case is still going on. And AJ, you haven't heard this yet, because I didn't talk about it in our previous recording. So, July 2021, the Eccles defense team, one of the biggest things to me that point to the West Memphis Three's innocence is Damien and Jason's, in particular, their insistence on searching for evidence in the case. Like, they've been pressuring law enforcement hard to test DNA and stuff like that, which would be pretty dumb to do if you were guilty.
Because if you're guilty, you would be pressuring them so hard,
Unless you're going for the reverse psychology tactic.
Oh, big brain. So in July 2021, West Memphis police claimed that the evidence that Eccles and his team wanted tested had been destroyed, lost or destroyed in a fire. They said, yeah, so you know the box with all of our evidence on the case? And the laces and the DNA that could belong to Terry Hobbs? Yeah, we lost it in a fire. My bad.
Of course.
Convenient.
Yeah, so then Eccles and his team was like, whoa, that's rough. Fire department, is that true? The fire department said, we don't actually have any records of any fires in that area.
Oh!
And then the police department said, okay, so maybe there wasn't a fire.
Case to me.
Yeah, so then the police department said, okay, so maybe there wasn't a fire, but we did lose all the evidence. Sorry about you. And then Eccles' team was like, hey, state of Arkansas, can we just show up at the West Memphis Police Department and ask to look at their evidence locker? And the state was like, yeah, go for it. And so the team shows up at the police station and goes into the evidence room and immediately finds, perfectly labeled and organized, where it is supposed to be, the box with all of the evidence from the case.
Oh my gosh.
Huh.
Not lost at all.
Someone's trying to hide the crime. Someone's trying to cover it.
Right? Like what? That is not negligence. That is malicious.
Yeah.
But there is
no way
you can't explain that as just being negligent. It was right where it was supposed to be.
If you go in having no experience in that police station and can immediately find the so-called lost evidence, then they have there's literally no possible way that the people who work there every day would not know exactly where it is if it's in where it's supposed to be. Someone's covering something up.
There does come a point when blissful ignorance, just like Kansas, just becomes malicious intent, and is just blatantly obvious. Like, you're being, as the kids would say, kind of sus right now, fam.
And that was one of the things. So as I told AJ, I recently, in preparation for this episode, met Jason Baldwin in person.
There's a friggin' picture. We'll put it up somewhere. We'll probably put it up on Instagram with the. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that'd be good to put in the photo dump, and we can also show it on screen here. But one of the things that he talked about was how for years he was sitting in prison thinking, "Oh my gosh, what a terrible mistake that they've made." And it wasn't until recently, when all of this has come out, that he finally had to stop and go, "Oh my gosh, it's not all a mistake." I can't imagine how, first of all, how incredibly, optimistic you have to be sitting in a prison cell with a life sentence thinking, these poor people made a mistake. So first of all, props to him, because I think that I would, from the get-go, regardless of whether it was true, be thinking, these people are out to get me.
Yeah, I would have probably thought the same thing. Like, nope, I'm...
Right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the big takeaways here is that there are still very present legal problems in our current legal system. The other thing that I want to talk about as we close this case is that this is a solvable case. The evidence is there, but beyond that, someone has heard something, someone knows something, and part of the reason that I felt so strongly about making this a video is in the off chance that someone right now is watching this and it triggers something. Maybe they weren't aware of what they saw at the time, they weren't aware of what was going on, but with this information in view, they suddenly realize, oh, I witnessed something. I think that these three boys can still find justice. And that three can refer both to the victims and to the victims.
Okay, so I think three things. Okay, one, it is an obvious inside cover-up, right? And just you look at it for 2 seconds, you see that. Two, they were pressured into taking that guilty plea. They were pressured into doing that. They were manipulated into doing that. And I don't know if what they did was entirely legal to get them to do that. That doesn't seem fully legal to me. And then three, because of what they pressured them into doing it, they can't sue the state and make them fix it. So now they are stuck. These three children who got murdered are stuck not having the person who actually killed them convicted. And these three people who got convicted are stuck still being convicted, even though it's obviously not them. And you can't take it to a higher state and have outside people look at it because it's an inside cover-up. But because you're not able to take it to a higher court or anything, you can't have people actually effectively analyze the data. So they need to find some way to get, maybe even another department to analyze the data, because it is not going to happen with that precinct. But I don't know how you would get that outside the jurisdiction,
So here's what's happening right now. Currently, the legal team is like, okay, we found the evidence, we want to test the evidence. And then the Arkansas State prosecutor said, no, I'm going to block that. So he made a motion to block the motion filed by Eccles' team to test the evidence. The grounds, he said that they had filed in the wrong county jurisdiction, which is so dumb, because you just easily could transfer it from one county to the other. They included the county that Memphis is in, and not the county that Jonesboro is in, where the trial took place, I believe, was the issue. So just the most, bureaucratic nonsense ever. And then the other thing that he said was that testing the DNA with the method that they wanted to use could potentially alter the DNA, which could prevent further testing, which would be a legitimate claim if I hadn't caught his ass in 4K. Because guess what? I found a previous statement that he'd made that he was going to have the evidence destroyed. So if you're so concerned about the DNA being altered, then why are you trying to get rid of it? Chew on that one for a little while, Arkansas prosecutor, because I caught ya.
We're 20 years old. I have been quite quiet these past few minutes because honestly, you guys have just said everything. There's nothing else that I could say that wouldn't be repetitive and gratuitous. So I've just been like, you guys are saying all the things. I could not have said anything better myself. I will say something that has been interesting. When it comes to the forcing of their confession, that the drawing of the line of what's legal and not is hard, because when you are in a room of interrogation under the state of law enforcement, whatever state you are in, anything in that anything in that interrogation room goes. And yes, technically what they did was not legally wrong at all, but it was definitely morally scummy. It was a very sadistic way of going about trying to get a confession.
And I think that legally even it is dubious, specifically because Jesse Miskelly is right on that cusp of being, I would say, mentally not capable of representing himself in that situation. So I honestly think that legally it could potentially be dubious for that reason as well.
It's definitely something guys, this is something that we're going to be following for a while, obviously, until it closes, so we'll probably be keeping you guys updated.
Yes. I'm going to try and go to the trial, so whenever the appeal happens, I'm going to try and be in that courtroom, and so I'll be able to give firsthand testimony on what happened there. That is one of the good things about our legal system, is that almost all court cases are public. So
backtracking just like a second. I know you were saying legally in an interrogation room anything goes. Mm-hmm. But I feel like, and I know it's not this way, but the second the tactics become morally reprehensible,
sure, there are certain things. There are certain things that you can't do. You know? You cannot physically assault them. It's hard. I'll have to do a little more research, because even though I'm knowledgeable of it, I'm not an expert in it. And I think that's really my stance on a lot of this is I'm knowledgeable of it, but I'm not an expert of it. So I think I'm going to do a little more research and try to figure out, try to ungray that line, try to really find the black and white in it.
I'd like to think that Jesse Miskelly's confession is the only one of its kind, that false confessions are something that never happens, and that this is a once-in-a-blue-moon event. But unfortunately, coerced confessions are not unheard of. There are other cases that you can very clearly look at and point to. Maybe if Judge David Burnett would have allowed any psychology-based testimony in the courtroom, then some experts could have weighed in on how Jesse gave what is a textbook example of all the markers you'd look for in a false confession. However, Burnett said that psychology had no place in the courtroom, so he did not allow any of those witnesses to testify. Regardless...
Do You said psychology has no place in the courtroom?
That is correct.
You know,
Yes,
psychology, which, you know,
official
analyzes
stance.
behavior and the mental state of the people. That's so dumb. That's so stupid. Indescribably stupid. I mean, I'm a little biased as a psychology minor, but also, like, that's indescribably stupid.
No, we're both psychology minors, and yeah, that is stupid.
2 things. 1, they didn't do it. And 2, everyone involved in this case is stupid, apparently. What the heck?
I'll say 3 things. 1, yes, didn't do it. They did not do it. I feel absolutely horrible on their behalf as to what they may be going through right now. 2, I think this is a very sad example as to why people have really averted from believing in the criminal justice system at all. This is just a very sad case of how toxic and manipulative and deceiving police officers and just criminal justice practitioners can be. And it's awful, and I think that the fact that there's no justice in what's going on infuriates me. It almost makes me want to go back to law enforcement so I can fix everything. 3, cults are kind of metal.
Rock on. I think I'll close with a little anecdote that I think gets to the heart of this case. It's from Jason Baldwin. When asked whether Baldwin harbors any negative feelings toward Jesse Misskelley, since it was Misskelley's confession that implicated him in the crime in any way in the first place, Baldwin asked if anyone in the room was a teacher, and I looked around and I saw a few people raise their hands, and he said, okay, so sometimes on the playground you'll see a little kid being harassed by a bully, right? And sometimes that bully will just put that little kid in a headlock, right? And then the bully will go, say uncle, say uncle, say uncle. And then finally that little kid will say uncle. And then he asked, when that kid says uncle, do you get mad at the kid who said it? Or do you get mad at the bully putting him in the headlock in the first place? I'm not mad at Jesse Misskelley. I never have been mad at Jesse Misskelley. I'm mad at the bullies that put him in the headlock. Thanks for watching.
There's a voice calling me from an old rugged tree, and it whispers, draw closer to me. Leave this world far behind, there are no lights to climb, and a new place it may you